Well, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're returning to the podcast, welcome back, and thank you for joining me again. If you are new to the podcast, this is a place where we talk about being real, the human experience, the human condition, the universal truths that if we can become aware of them, then we can put ourselves on a path to wholeness. That means a connection to ourselves, connection to other people, and a connection to life, a deep, deep level. Creativity is often the vehicle for moving in that direction, as creativity allows the unconscious to become conscious, so we can unblock ourselves, keep flowing, keep growing. Today's interview is with Jennifer Norman from the Human Beauty Movement. Jennifer ultimately focuses on mind, body, soul, health, and well-being. And that's ultimately what we talk about in this conversation. If I was going to sum this up, this is a conversation about self-acceptance, loving yourself, loving life, some of the obstacles and challenges to get into that place, but also how we can do so and the benefits of just living in that way. So Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your energy and your wisdom. Everybody else, hope this helps. Here we go. Thanks a bunch. Boom. Oh, hi there, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Creative Status. We're going to be talking about a lot of my favorite topics and buzzwords, mainly creative expression and how the ego can hinder our progress in that area. Before we get into it, do you feel like introducing yourself, telling people what you're all about, and also sharing what you want to get out of this conversation that we're about to have?
Well, yes. Hello, Ollie. Hello, everyone in the UK and around the world. My name is Jennifer Norman. I'm based out of Los Angeles, and I am the founder of a company called the Human Beauty Movement. And I am a person who has been in the art field as well as the beauty field for pretty much my entire career. And now I'm doing something a little bit different. Instead of focusing on beauty on the outside, as it were, I'm focusing on beauty from within. So we can talk all about that and how it interrelates with creativity.
That's amazing. So let's literally just dive right into that. Like a lot of people, they do seem to be extremely obsessed, let's say, these days with how they look on the outside. That implies that they're seeking all kinds of things which may hinder their growth and their ability to express what is actually inside them. By that, all I mean is if we're too obsessed with how we look on the outside, which, you know, it may be worth doing to some extent, but if we're too obsessed with it, then we're seeking validation from other people, we're seeking approval from other people, we're seeking all these things from the world that we can probably only give ourselves if we tap into that inner beauty that you're talking about, I assume. So I'm making a bunch of assumptions there, but is that a good way to crack open this conversation?
I think it's a great way to crack open the conversation because you're right, depending on how you've grown up and what your influences are, we always are looking from a very early age for cues on what's right and wrong, on what's good behavior, bad behavior, and approval. We often will seek approval first from our families, from our parents, from our teachers, from those around us, because it helps us to, get that dopamine hit. It helps us feel good about ourselves when we get the accolades and we get, you did a great job on that. And so it makes you want to do it even more. But a lot of times what happens is if people are constantly validating or you hear people validating others for how they look or, what they've created in terms of just, from a physical external form, then that becomes very much your reward system rather than thinking about, I'm going to do this for me. It's almost as if you're prioritizing what people think of you and how you're coming across rather than trying to just be yourself.
I think when people fall into that trap, it just ends up creating a real void within them because ultimately they become disconnected from their own power, let's say. I believe, and I've experienced, and I've seen with my own coaching clients and things like this, that the stronger the foundation that we have within ourselves, and the more that we can flow with that, the less that we do care about the external world and the less we care about what other people think of us and all that kind of thing. And then we can show up in a way that's more real and actually have better relationships with the external world. But it seems like a lot of people, for some reason, which maybe we should dive into, have fallen into this kind of abyss, let's say, which sounds very dramatic, where they're just trying to control things at the superficial surface level, and they live like that. But then they still have this kind of restless feeling, let's say, where they feel like there's more, and they don't realize that all they do need to do is just kind of flip the script a little bit and turn inwards. So is there something around how simple it can be to make that shift from the external to the internal, but for some reason we kind of overcomplicate it, and we think that, it's going to be a lot harder to get where we want to be than it actually is? That was a very convoluted question.
Not at all. And it makes perfect sense. And I know that you as a coach probably come across this quite often. And what I have discovered is, you're right, that there is a disconnect. And sometimes we feel that our lives have gotten away from us, that all of a sudden you look and you kind of feel hollow inside because you've done so much to try to put on a facade, or you've done so much to please other people that you forget about who you really are inside and what really lights you up and what brings you joy. And that is actually not a very easy thing to get back to. It is not so simple because it's layers and layers and years of conditioning. And it really gets into the fiber of how you know how to be, or at least what you think that you've been taught, the way that you've been taught to be, rather than really just understanding and taking those moments to really get to know yourself and what truly is an expression of your authenticity.
I'm making an assumption again about your work, but how does this feed into the concept that you've got about shifting to that kind of inner beauty? So my assumption is that, the more aligned we are, let's say, with our real values, our real intentions, all of the real stuff that does get clouded and masked behind all of that conditioning and the shame and stuff that we pick up, the more that we can get that stuff out of the way, the more that this kind of internal beauty is going to shine through. And then we can start to kind of dissolve or forget about all of this external stuff that we've been discussing so far.
Yeah, and I love the fact that nowadays it's okay for people to let their authentic selves come through, whether they're grieving, whether they're in pain, whether they feel, whether there's shame or a secret in the background. It's almost as if it's a beautiful time to be alive, because more and more, at least in the society that I've come across, there is a breaking down of walls, of breaking down these generational cycles of, oh, you can't say that, or you can't be that way, or your parents expect you to be a certain way, and therefore your life must be this way, or else you'll disappoint the family. It seems like more and more times we're understanding that we just need to be okay with being ourselves, and it's okay to go a different path. It might not be the easy road. It might not be a short road. It can very well be a lifelong journey. I know that all of us are on this lifelong journey of self-discovery and understanding ourselves even further. And so the work that I have come across is really born out of my own experience. It is out of the concept that I really, for many, many years of my life, didn't really feel like I knew who I was. And it was only until I started asking myself questions after feeling that, gosh, I'm just not, I don't feel like I know myself. I don't feel like I really understand myself. I feel like a lot of the things that I had previously done were to really stroke the ego. And so that's where the danger came across, and, a lot of issues of just existential crises and, a lot of depression and a lot of things that I think a lot of folks might also relate to that are happening now. And so it takes a while for you to be okay to shut down social media, turn off the news, almost go into a place where you can really shut out that noise of the outer world, which is so very loud. And, we get, 60,000 messages per second in life these days. And so how is it that we can possibly, be ourselves when all we hear is everything that we should be doing and that we should be being from the outside? And that's where the work starts. It starts with those quiet moments. It starts with those, those reversals of the script, the kindness of the self-talk rather than the critical self-talk that some of us have come to. And then you can start shifting from a place of ego to a place that is really that inner core of yourself.
Yeah. I love how you just expressed all that. And I think the main theme that's kind of emerging there is that it's ultimately about acceptance. I think acceptance is basically where all of these kind of journeys of self-development or self-help or whatever you want to call it, healing, they all lead back to acceptance. And in a way, that's ultimately what we've been talking about. So for whatever reason it is, people end up being kind of split from their true selves, which means that they're not accepting themselves, because the only thing you can do with the truth is accept it. So they become split because of shame and social conditioning and all the things that we said. And then they create a kind of false version of themselves, which I call the ego. And they take that ego out into the world, and all of their goals and ambitions, their points of view about themselves and everything else around them is filtered through that false image. And so they just keep bringing things back into their lives that just reinforce that kind of disconnect we were talking about, that kind of itch that just needs to be scratched. And if we can slow down and start flipping the script, like you were saying, and return back to that acceptance, then we start to put ourselves back on the path that we could have been walking the whole time, which is just the path back towards wholeness or towards realness or whatever you want to call it. And that's when we get into the flow and things start to feel good again. I think a lot of people who are depressed, they're just really caught up in that kind of egotistical way of thinking, not through any fault of their own. They're just running on autopilot. And if we can undo that programming and the emotional stuff behind it, then things tend to work out again. But in relation to the beauty thing, just to kind of link all these different concepts, this may be a bit off the wall, but can we say that beauty and truth are linked at some level? And by that, what I mean is, like, we have these kind of, these cultural ideas of what beauty is, and a lot of them, those standards have just been filtered through the ego and all the stuff I was just talking about, because the people who have come up with those standards or try to uphold them are actually just filtering everything through their own shame, and they're trying to run away from it rather than facing the truth. That's when it all ends up being externalized. But like you said, if people can return to this place of acceptance, then they really accept the truth about themselves, and that just kind of puts them in a different flow state, let's say, or a different vibe, whatever word we want to use. And then that is when I guess the real beauty reveals itself, because this sounds really trite, but like the truth is beautiful about all of us if we can accept it and kind of move with it. I'm getting very romantic here, but is there anything is there anything that
I appreciate all that you had just said, because it's very rich with a lot of content and a lot of things that we can, deconstruct and really talk about. I think the first place to start is with the word acceptance, which I think gets battered around quite a lot. Self-acceptance, I accept myself, and it I think unto itself, there is self-acceptance, like, this is where I am now. It doesn't mean that I'm going to not change. It doesn't mean that this is the way that I am and I can't change, and I'm going to be like this forever. So that's just the way that it is. That's not really what the self-acceptance is that we're talking about. The self-acceptance really that I'm mentioning is really born out of a real deep sense of self-love, and that you can love yourself no matter what. So in so doing, you accept where you are, and you know that you can constantly develop, you can constantly grow, you can constantly improve, you can constantly be more of yourself, growing into this self that you always wanted to be. And so that's what I wanted to just point out about the word acceptance, because the truth is always going to be about the fact that you are a powerful and miraculous being that is here. That is the truth. The truth is that words like beauty, words like love have definitely gotten distorted in culture. I think a lot of people banter around, oh, I love this, I love that. And so it's taken for granted, or it can mean so many different things, and nobody really knows exactly what you're meaning when you say love. If you really loved me, then you do this for me. That's not really love, or, something looks really beautiful, but it was really, something that was born out of, a lot of atrocity. It is not so beautiful once you think about it that way. So, there is this distortion that does happen on the surface level. So the truth of beauty, to your point, is really that which is deeper. That is, that life force that is within, that can self-express itself in a very authentic way, that understands and appreciates the environment that it is in, and is able to thrive, in the face of, pressures and calamities and all of that. That is beauty. That's beautiful when you can be yourself despite everything else that's going on around you, and in recognition and in harmony with the environment in which we live. It's really about that whole idea of authentic self-expression that comes from within.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so happy that you brought up the distortion, because it's 100% true. Like, I think a lot of the time, especially in kind of these like self-help, personal development communities, people end up kind of distorting these words like acceptance and love, like you said, in a way that kind of actually prevents people from getting where they want to be or where they really need to be. With the acceptance thing, it kind of ends up being filtered through the ego again. And when it is filtered through the ego, it becomes about taking people out of the process or the natural flux of life. And so it's exactly what you just said. Like, ultimately, there's two kinds of acceptance. You accept where you are, but then you try and make it seem as though you're going to stay there for the rest of your life, which is impossible. Or you accept yourself as a being that is constantly evolving, constantly expanding, which means that you accept where you currently are. Because if you don't accept where you currently are, then you can't actually change things in the way that you want to. But you also accept your potential. You accept the being that you are becoming. And so you're actually, it's about that fluidity. And I think a lot of the time, especially, I don't know if it's controversial or whatever, but like with some of the body acceptance movement stuff online, I think people, they use it in the distorted way where it's almost about using words like acceptance and self-love and so on and so forth as a way of kind of running away from the truth, if you want to use that word, by which I just mean their potential to kind of go to the next level. Because I think ultimately, like, broken record, we're all on a kind of a journey, let's say, and it's up to us to decide whether or not to like take ourselves down that path and to do the inner work required to be able to go into a deeper acceptance. And so I'm just really happy you brought that up, because like acceptance, it's not just about this static idea of who we are. It's about this fluid experience of what we can be. And so if you don't understand that, then you get lost.
Yeah, at the core, it's interesting when you were talking about body positivity and that movement that tends to happen now, and I embrace the idea that all bodies are beautiful, and that love yourself where you're at. I am very much there. That doesn't mean that if you've gotten to a place where your body is unhealthy, then there's room for improvement. There's always a way to ensure that you're living a life that is healthy for you, that, helps you thrive. And so I think that's where, a bit of the backlash has come. It's just like, we're not fat shaming. We're not saying that, that it's great to be fat. It's just, we always want people to be healthy, whatever that means for them. Some people just are inflicted with certain allergies or illnesses. And so, their level of helpfulness may be different than somebody who is a professional athlete, let's say. But, can you continue to be on a path of continued healthfulness and wellness? And so what I've been finding is that, in a lot of cases, there is this distortion, and I do see it happening because it's the dopamine, isn't it? It's it's the reward system of how many likes can I get, or how much business can I accumulate unto myself if I shock people, or if I put in something that's controversial to get eyeballs. And so we have a really interesting way of socializing these days and of doing business, which is really, it rewards like shock value, or it rewards the controversy, it rewards the drama. On news, it rewards the bad news because it's going to get people talking. And is that necessarily helping us to be better humans? Is it helping us to be, to know ourselves better, or to be as healthy as we can? I'd much rather, people listen to podcasts like this so that they can really, have these deep dives and think about, how they can live their own truths and how they might be able to find harmony with whatever health and wellness means for them. It's interesting because I actually do some workshops which are all about mental health as well as art. And interestingly enough, there are some portions where we create art to really, just get out there, like express how we mean it. It could be scribbling, it could be doodling, it could be, creating pictures or images that express, how they're feeling right now. And so, that form of creativity is really a form of catharsis. It's a form of healing. It's a form of helping to get out those expressions of yourself that are not as easily put into words, because let's face it, language is so limited and it can very easily be misunderstood. And so, some people dance, some people make music, some people write, some people do, different things in order to be able to release and self-express in a more cathartic way. And then it's interesting because in working with the Department of Mental Health here in Los Angeles, they also are asking students to create these comic book strips to express mental health, but they pay for them. And so from that standpoint, the art then becomes commercial art, and it has a different intention. It's not necessarily about self-expression and catharsis. It's about conveying a message so that it can help other people. But you're also putting on the filter that, I might not be able to talk about certain things of myself because this is going to a more public audience and it's government run. And so, it's like you have to put on a different hat and a different layer for that particular creative aspect. Same thing when we do, graphic design for a client, or if we're doing commercial art, it's for somebody else. You're in service for somebody else. And so some people think art is art, but truly there are multifaceted aspects of art and creativity, and, and even, the way that we're self-expressing and knowing what those lanes are from within is a very important distinction, because a lot of times we sometimes get confused as to, well, they're not buying my art. Well, if your art wasn't meant for, for a service to somebody else, then, and it's just for you, it has a different intention. That's why the phrase starving artists came about, is because, their art was really meant for them to appreciate, enjoy, and not necessarily intended as a service to other people.
This is a really interesting point, and it comes down to the ego thing again. I think there are two main ways. There's probably more, but there's two main ways of creating anything. And that can be like a work of art. It can be also something, I guess, to a higher level, like the way that we create ourselves or the way we create our lives in general. And it's basically, we're either doing it through this kind of ego-driven way that we've already kind of alluded to at the start of the conversation when we're talking about like just beauty in general and looking for external validation, or we can do it in a kind of, I guess, more personal way where it's more about just exploring what's going on inside of us, making some of those unconscious things that we need to either integrate or release conscious and bringing them to the surface. And in general, knowing what we're doing, whether we're just doing it for external validation, which in the most extreme case is just doing it to make money, let's say, versus doing it to grow and heal. If we know which path we're on, then it's going to allow us to get better results in either way. Like when it comes to money, I guess, like as an artist, there's nothing wrong, I suppose, with just creating something because you're going to make money, as long as you know that's what you're doing. I suppose the danger is when you start fooling yourself into thinking that you are doing some higher level thing when really you're not. I think as long as you're honest with your intentions, then you can get the results that you want to get. And I think we can apply that to all areas of life. I suppose the curveball question for you is, how does that apply to what we've been saying, I guess, about our, relationship with beauty standards and all that kind of stuff, if it even does?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I wanted to start with the fact that, we have egos for a reason, and there are definitely different philosophies on the ego is bad, the ego is not your amigo, or, hey, ego is everything. And, part of having an ego as a human experience is to be able to enjoy and codify this life that we have here on earth. Otherwise, there'd be no organization. We would never be, able to label and and understand the difference between one thing or another. And so we developed egos, and we developed this notion of separate identities or identification for a reason. And it's helpful. It's, it helps us to organize and to exist and, in a very rational, shall I say, way. When we also are these spiritual beings having this human experience. I know that that's a trite phrase at this point, but underneath it all, or over it all, or within it all, we are all one, and everything is unified. And so knowing that both of them exist, and that a lot of times this idea of ego and identity and separation, whereas it can be extremely helpful as a tool, and I believe that it was intended to be extremely helpful as a tool, a lot of times our proclivity is to cling to identity and cling to the separation, that you're not me and I'm not you, and you're different than me, and I'm more powerful than you, or you're, you make more money than me, and, or, I am, not living the life that person is living. And so it gets to this place of comparing and identification, and then soreness and this bitterness between identities that causes issues. Ultimately, the idea of diversity, equity, appreciation, belonging, all of that is that all of this is beautiful. It's all that, the representation of humanity in all of our forms of self-expression is a wonderful thing, and being able to recognize it for its differences and appreciate it for its differences is really where we aspire to be. And so from that aspect and how it relates to beauty is that, when we think, or, of course, what I'm talking about is the beauty industry, which is very different than true beauty. I do know that a lot of people will say, you know what, I'm not happy with the way that I look, or the way that, I'm serving, or, if I wear a certain outfit, it's not going to be acceptable in a certain place. It's not acceptable to, go to the beach in, a three-piece suit versus, or, you go to the office in a bikini, it's like that's not acceptable or appropriate, which makes perfect sense. These are societal norms and cultural cues that we've been born into, and that are considered acceptable. And that's always changing. That's always being pushed. And when we understand that there is an evolution to identity, there is an evolution to all of that. And then the idea is that if we get caught up in that rat race of trying to fit in, if we get caught up and really in it, and it bothers us, it gets, into us in terms of making us feel less than, then that is where the issues lie. And it can't really be pointed so much to anybody else, but we can do what we can to change society. But first we have to change ourselves. We have to recognize it within ourselves. And that's the part that a lot of people, have trouble with. I know I had trouble with that. Yeah. It's that, if you're able to say, I'm wearing this makeup, or I want to do this look, or I want to experiment with this dye because I love it, it's so much fun, I feel so much joy when I'm doing it, then that's amazing and that is beautiful. And that's when you know that it's authentic. But if you are deep down thinking oh, that person did this kind of look and I'm jealous of that and I want to be that, or gosh, I'm just never going to be able to do something as good as that person does as far as her look, or I'm never going to be able to be this model. That's when it becomes problematic. It's that notion of how you feel when you're engaging in a specific activity, to know whether it's truthful for you, or and whether it's something that is really self-expressive, or whether it's just being done for validation and for ego.
Yeah, 100%. Again, you've said so many amazing things. I could just open up a whole kind of worms in a million different directions right now. But what you said about the ego, let's start with that. That is so powerful and so true. The ego, the way that I see it is it's a necessity to survive in the world, but it's not real. It's just a kind of filter that we use to be able to navigate life based on where we think we've already been. And if we see it like that, just as a filter or just as a tool that we have power over and that we can reconfigure as necessary so that it serves us more as we do navigate life, then I don't think it's anything to worry about. The problem is when we don't realize that it is a filter and we think that it's who we are. And when we think that the ego is who we are, that's when we lapse into all of these problems that you just talked about, where we use our identity as something that puts a barrier between us and life, rather than something that allows us to really connect to life. And so I guess an example there is that the more people do cling to their identities, the more they focus on the differences between themselves and other people instead of the similarities, let's say. If we're only focused on the differences, then we just end up falling into this kind of void that we were talking about, this existential void where we believe that we're separate from everything else, that we're disconnected, that we don't have power over our lives, that everyone else is in competition or comparison with us and all this kind of stuff. And it's all just about the choice we're making at that internal level of our relationship with ourselves. And I think we can boil it down to the difference between either being a cause or living as an effect, basically. The law of cause and effect applies to all of us. But if we're too caught up in our ego, in the sense of just thinking we are this filter, we just experience life as though it happens to us. It's there's a quote by Carl Jung. He says, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And so when we're caught up in the identity and we're just so bothered about all these differences between us and other people, we just focus on the effects the world is having on us. If we can get into the other side of the equation, we're like, okay, I am the cause of the effects in my life. And then we can start making these kind of real choices that are going to lead us to this kind of place of wholeness and to get to the other side of catharsis, I guess, which was something that came up, which always leads to the same place, having an empowered relationship with ourselves and with life. But we can only do that if we do have this kind of realistic understanding of what the ego is, which is that it's nothing. It's not real, so there's no point treating it as being real, if that makes sense. But we still need to know that it can impact us if we kind of get into this automatic sleepwalking state that a lot of people find themselves in. So that being the case, how do we use all of these things that we've kind of been talking about to create a realistic, or not realistic, but a healthy relationship with the way that we see ourselves in relation to like beauty and the life that we create as a kind of response to that? Like,
absolutely. And thank you for all of that. I think that one of the great places to start is to always contemplate why, the question why am I like this? Why am I doing this? Why am I behaving this way? And, wake up in the morning, start your gratitude practice and journal and think about it, meditate on it. Because Gary Vaynerchuk actually said this wonderful quote, which cracks me up, but it's kind of true because, there are so many countries which are we're living in deficit. There's this great divide between, how much we're buying, how much we're consuming, how much waste that there is in the world. And so we're pretty much over consuming and we're over wasting. And so are we working in jobs that we hate to buy things that we don't need to impress people that we don't like? It's like, so if that is you, raise your hand or think, yeah, that's me. I'm working in a job that I really, hate, that I'm, and I'm buying things that I really don't need to impress people that I really don't like. Okay. So let's start there and say like, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And so that to me means that, a lot of us are living lives that are not really ourselves and not truthful to ourselves. We're not living within our means. We're not enjoying, what we have and having gratitude for the things that we already have in our lives. And so, luckily, I do see people, it's wonderful when I'm like, okay, people are, selling their mansions and they're moving into tiny houses, or they've decided to like pack it up and be digital nomads. It's like, it's like being truthful and living a life that is true for you and that brings you so much joy. And and knowing that you are empowered. It might not be easy. It might not happen overnight, but if you can, think about what would bring you the most joy in life, can you then, send that out into the universe and then make it happen? It's interesting how the universe will work once you realize it's like, I don't want to, have that private jet because it's, why would I want it so that I can impress other people, or do you really need it? Is it something that helps because you are in a position where, your true self has gotten to a place where, you just really need to be in a certain place. There's a lot of differences between, wants and needs. And then all of the things that we stack on that for pure pleasure and joy from an internal self versus what we're doing for other, to impress other people. So that's kind of where I would start. I think that that's pretty practical. It's just like to ask yourself those questions, try as much as possible to tune out all of the noise of everything else. And then, eventually, I mean, it could take years. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to tell people that it's going to happen instantly. I know everybody wants instant, and that's one of the reasons why we are where we are. But ultimately, it's a beautiful thing when you can really be in coherence with your head and your heart.
Yeah. There's a word you've used a few times, and I think it sums up the conflict that is within a lot of these people that are kind of lost and living these lives of quiet desperation. Yeah. And it's a noise. Like, there's a difference, as we've all heard, between the noise and the signal. The noise, I think, is just all of the ego stuff, all of the, not just the inner friction and frustration that's caused by having the inner split that leads to the ego in the first place, but all of the extra noise that we bring into our lives on top of that. So if we're going out into the world thinking that we are this filter of the ego, like I was saying, then we just end up putting friction between ourselves and life. So that causes noise internally. But then to deal with that noise, we get involved in all kinds of crazy behaviors and activities that just make it worse and worse. So we end up inviting more drama into our lives. For example, we might get addicted to things. We might overconsume in the way you were talking about. All of those things are just attempts to kind of release some of this tension of having this inner friction. the alternative is that we can learn to really listen to ourselves in the way that you're talking about, and we find that real signal that is just always been emitted from somewhere inside of us. You can call it your real voice or your real intention, whatever it is. There's a signal inside us that kind of is very, very clear when all of the noise is just ignored, and we can train ourselves to ignore it. And when we do, that's when we can actually start to create the life that we really want. I love what you just kind of alluded to about the law of attraction. Like, a lot of the time, when people do try to use the law of attraction, they're trying to bring things into their lives that are just desires that they have at the level of their ego or the conscious mind. But because they haven't done some of this inner work, they don't have a connection to that inner signal that's telling them what they really want. And so the example you used of the jet is a great one, because like, if the level of your conscious mind, you have this desire to get a jet because you think finally mommy and daddy are going to be proud of you, or the neighbors are going to be jealous, whatever it is, then you're never going to get it anyway. Or if you do get it, it's going to make you miserable because the intention behind it was not real. It was not connected to that signal. And so you're just going to end up bringing more noise in. And so if we can kind of go a few levels deeper and just reconnect to our being, like seems to be the main theme of this conversation, then if we're coming from that place, life will be a bit more beautiful, pun intended. Like, I tried to just bring everything full circle, but life will be more beautiful in a way, because what we're working to bring into our lives, because the actions we'll be taking are going to be more aligned and all that kind of stuff, is going to be more beautiful, in the sense that it's just going to be more aligned with the truth, and it's going to be more real, and it's going to be coming from this place of acceptance rather than this kind of noisy, dramatic world that we live in a lot of the time, when we've lost focus because we think we're the ego. So I've rambled at you a lot in this podcast. I find myself saying that to people a lot. Like, the time has gone very quick. Like, I've got to be honest. Like, I always say that, but I genuinely mean it. Like, it's gone very quick. Do you think it's possible for you to sum up what we've talked about? Like, what are the main lessons here? And can you let people know where they can find you as well?
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Ali. Yes, you're right. This the time always seems to fly, but particularly with you, because it's just been so pleasurable chatting with you here. And, if I were to sum up, I would say, what the truth is, everybody, you are so beautiful. You are so amazing. You are a light of love, and just like this miracle that I would love for you to just be able to take a moment and pat yourself on the back. Yay, you. High five you. You are here. You're doing your thing. You are amazing. And there is so much in store for you. There's so much goodness, and there's so much amazing stuff in store for you in this life. And by just reaching in and taking those moments to love yourself, to get to know yourself more, to appreciate yourself, and to then be living a life out of your own joy, out of your own positive energy, is really the way forward. It's really the way forward. If you can live more days just loving yourself and loving the life that you have, then you will continue to love the life that you're living. And that is beautiful.
That was amazing. I'm glad we recorded this episode, because I think I'm going to take that little summary that you just shared with us, and I'm just going to play it over and over again to reprogram my subconscious mind.
There you go.
That was awesome. What's your website? And can you tell people about your podcast and stuff as well?
Yes. I am the host of the Human Beauty Movement podcast. And you can find my work at thehumanbeautymovement.com, and there'll be all sorts of links to other places where I do my work there. And I do also have a very holistic product line, which is called Humanist Beauty. Humanistbeauty.com is that information. And as my side hustle, which is also my passion, I write children's books for kids to learn about different kinds of disabilities, to help normalize and destigmatize disability. And that is at supercaptainbraveman.com.
That's amazing. So I'll share all those links in the show notes. But Jennifer, thank you so much for your energy. Like, I feel good now. I feel like I'm in a very good, harmonized place. So thank you for that. And thanks again. That was awesome.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you so much for all of your work. And it was lovely to speak with you today.